it's so important to name multiple facets of experience that are possible doing continuum, and it's so precious and so vast.
Yes, yes, it really is. And that actually reminds me of this other piece I was thinking of and just thinking about my own continuum experience. Uh, I feel like continuum for me has been a way for me to know whatever word you want to use, either God or grace or divinity, through through this body as a somatic experience. So I'm also someone who, and again, this could have been, who knows? This could be me coming into the world. It could have been influenced by the fact that I was not supposed to live very long. I was diagnosed with CF when I was 2 years old. I watched my best friend, die by the time I was 12. So I had exposure to death and this idea of death or not being with the body anymore, and at an early age. And I also had a grandmother who did a beautiful white light piece with me, but that's a whole nother story. So I was someone who was very curious, a sort of a seeker of ways to know beyond this body and to know God or grace or life or love, capital L, not emotional so much. But so that was already a part of me. And I've been to India, Japan, traveled to different places. I've looked outside, different teachers, experienced many different spiritual, and have worked with some, different spiritual teachings. Anyway, all this to say that I was looking to know God, and sometimes that I think I associated that with leaving this body, and not identifying with this body. And one of the beautiful gifts of Continuum for me has been knowing God through the body. So actually, one of my favorite artist, Trevor Hall, he speaks to in his recent album, I think it's called In and Through the Body. And when I heard him say that, I was like, yes. And I actually texted and said, you need to know about Continuum. But not that he would ever get it. I don't know. It probably went to some manager somewhere. But I was like, in and through the body. That's part of what it is. And that it's not limited to this body, our cultural body. It's also an experience of planetary body, cosmic body, but that all that is possible by just dropping in and exploring and being curious and using this body as a vehicle to experience and access things that are this body, but also beyond this body. And again, I mean, that speaks to Continuum, the name, movement, all these things I've touched on before. But it does feel important to me to say that that has been one of the gifts of Continuum for me, is to know the divine through the body and through experience of felt movement, and to let myself be moved. And this also goes back to the taking the brakes off and the letting go. But there's a both and that's so beautiful about Continuum. There's an intention, there's a going in with a motif or laying out a dive. And then there's the, once we're in, let's see what's here, and that open attention time, that to really know. And for me, that's been an integrating of uh, beyond the body and the body, divinity and the nitty gritty of the juice and guts and blood, and both and in and through.
There are a few things there that I'd love to hear you speak about more. When you mention the planetary body and the cosmic body, could you say more about what you mean by each of those? And the
Sure.
cultural body as well. You mentioned all three. So the differences.
Sure. So those are terms that we talk about in Continuum sometimes, in terms of different ways to experience ourselves. And so, what I would say about that is, when I think of the cultural body, I think of our system of, and this is the thing, that one I feel like can be a little tricky to talk about, because sometimes a cultural body could be just an experience of this particular body, and sometimes it's an engagement between, like, let's say you and I, or the group culture, or a country identity, or but this what is our experience of I in the moment. I think that's what, when I talk about all the different bodies, that's what it comes down to, is what is my experience of I. And so sometimes, and in most of everyday living, my experience of I is, my name is Kori. And then what Continuum invites us into, and Continuum is not alone in this, but what Continuum, one of the benefits of Continuum, or gifts of Continuum, is that it invites us into these different experiences of I, so that maybe when I'm in a dive, as I open up to what is it like to know the movement of the bird, for example, like we talked about, or the serpent, or the ocean, or whatever the planetary piece, those can be access points for us to open our identity of this I, to know the I of the planet in an experiential way, so that suddenly my I is actually moved and informed and becomes identified with the planetary body. So I loosen my identity of I am Kori, and I know myself as I am planet, I am waters, I am ocean, I am earth, I am the fire, the energy, and the plants that rises up to meet. I am air, to know that as I. And then as we're expanding out, if we let go even more layers, when we're feeling into the energy of that moves through all things, that moves through the cosmos, and we let go of the identity of I as a planetary body, then we can loosen our reality even of that, and our experience of that, and open into I as eternity, cosmic flow, and be moved and experience that place, so that the identity of I is then bigger still. Does that make sense?
Yes, beautiful explanation. Thank you.
Welcome.
You also mentioned your grandmother and a white light experience. I don't know if you want to talk about that at all, but it seemed important at the time.
Sure, I would be happy to. So I'm so grateful to my grandmother. It makes me smile thinking about it. And yeah, so she was with my mom. I was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis when I was 2 months old. I was what they called a failure to thrive baby. So not growing, food would just go right through me. I was fortunate in that my pediatrician happened to have just had some experience in learning about CF at the time. There was no genetic testing at this time. That in itself is a longer story, but what it came down to is, she said, does she taste like salt when you kiss her? And my mom was like, well, yeah. She said, okay, we need to bring her in for a sweat test. And so it turns out I have cystic fibrosis. And, that was devastating news, I could imagine, for my mother and father and my grandmother, my whole family, probably. I was first born there, and my mother was young, scary experience. So, my grandmother started from before. I don't even know when she started. I'm sure it was probably before I could talk, but certainly I remember this as a young child. I would spend the night at her house, and well, actually, I lived with them for some time. My parents were divorced by the time I was 1. And she would do this thing she called the white light with me. And so this was probably some of my first experience of going somewhere different than what I was maybe experiencing in the flesh, and opening up to feeling in different ways. And she would walk me back. We'd count down from 10 to 1, and we'd always go to the beach in these visualizations, and all the as I got older and animals or people had passed, all those people would be there on the beach, and we would feel the golden light of the sun, the healing white light of the sun into my body. And my grandma would touch my face with her soft hands and touch my system and talk me through this experience of knowing a healing white light in my system. And, she's not someone who's particularly spiritual. She's been immersed in different religions for certain times, but then not really. And can sometimes be a little negative, and all sorts of things. But there was something in her. I love her laugh. She's a kindred spirit of mine. But there was something in her that knew to give me this gift. And I don't even know where it came from, but it allowed me to open as a little one to using imagery and opening myself to experiences, really being able to feel, imagine what would it be like to have this healing white light penetrate my system. So it was an incredible gift as a young person. And I still don't know that my grandmother understands to what level that made an impact on me, but it did. And it opened me up so that I think I was able to experience many different experiences beyond that. But that was kind of my first entry to that type of possibility.